isn't there a mismatch here between thinking about, these really kind of basic stop and think skills, but if I put in, intellectual demand into Google, if I put in higher order thinking skills into Google, I get a picture like this. And what's this picture about? Well, of course, it's blooms. It's blooms and blooms and blooms and blooms. Higher order thinking, it seems to have been taken over by blooms. When we get, pictures like this, so that's the old blooms from the 50s, and the new blooms that was changed and adapted. But what's interesting about blooms is things like, there's no basis for it. There's no theoretical basis for blooms. There's no rationale. There's absolutely no basis for expressing it as a hierarchy. That false hierarchy that Bloom's gives us, I find it really disappointing that we're still running with this idea that you do this first and then this and then this and then this. That was being questioned back in the 60s, and even Bloom, when he wrote in this retrospective about Bloom's taxonomy, talked about how there's so much mythology around what he'd said. So many consultants and other people had picked up some of his ideas and kind of over-interpreted them and stretched them and made it into rules. You've got to do this and you've got to do it in this way. And I love this quote from that same article of his, talking about how he thought that his original article was one of the most widely cited yet least read books in education. That it had been interpreted by others, but actually, we weren't going back to the original. And so, this idea of the false hierarchy, worries me. But what Bloom was trying to do when he first said it was to get his teachers to take the first steps in raising the intellectual demand. But what he wasn't doing was saying, and this is it, this is that shift of intellectual demand. Bloom's is the beginning and the end of shifting intellectual demand. Look, I don't want to kind of bag Bloom's, and I don't want to say, let's chuck it away. But I think it's more important to think about it as a first step. But I would say, let's not think about it as being a hierarchy. Last time we talked about, the evidence behind the maths curriculum and those 5 strands, and we represented it in this way, in these proficiencies in the Australian curriculum. And it's tempting to think about these in terms of Bloom's, that things like remembering are over on the left-hand side in the knowledge and know-how, and that's the creating and the analysing and some of those things are up here in problem-solving and reasoning, and that there's a hierarchy. But the people who put together the adding it up evidence that is the basis of this in the maths curriculum were very clear that there were 5 equal strands, that they're not a hierarchy. And so I think that ideas of higher order thinking skills and that you can teach higher order thinking skills really trap us in this idea of, our lower performing kids need to stay over into that left hand side, that somehow these are the basic skills and that reasoning and problem solving are not basic skills, are not fundamental learning skills for all kids. And I think that you can see that idea of a hierarchy, that idea of our lower performing kids being that we could trap our lower performing kids over into that left hand side. What it's also suggesting to me is, that data from Dunedin, that if we're not stretching and demanding stop and think skills from all of our kids, we're trapping them in lower socioeconomic status. We're trapping them in poorer outcomes because we're not developing them in terms of that broader stop and think stuff.